The fluorescent lights in the Oakdale pharmacy had a way of making everything look sickly, or maybe that was just how I felt after a 12-hour shift at the Blackwood mine. My work jacket still smelled like coal dust and recycled air, and my hands were so stained that no amount of industrial soap could get the black out of my cuticles. I stood at the counter, bone-weary, just wanting to grab my blood pressure meds and go home to a quiet house. The clerk, a girl no older than 20 with a sympathetic smile, slid my debit card through the reader. I didn't even look at her. I was staring at a display of greeting cards, thinking about whether I should pick one up for Cynthia just because it had been a long week. The machine let out a sharp, rhythmic beep, the kind of sound that makes everyone in line behind you look up from their phones. The clerk frowned, swiped it again, and waited. I watched the little gray screen. Declined. Insufficient funds. The words didn't make sense. It was like reading a language I didn't speak. I told her there must be a mistake, that my paycheck had hit the account on Friday over $3,000 of overtime and sweat. She tried it one more time, her smile turning tight and uncomfortable, the way people get when they think they're witnessing a private tragedy. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitaker," she whispered. "It's still saying insufficient. Do you have another way to pay?" I didn't. I had one card, one account, and 38 years of honest labor behind me. I ended up digging through my glove box for spare change and crumpled singles just to cover a $47 prescription. As I drove home, the Appalachian Hills were turning into jagged silhouettes against a purple sky, but I couldn't appreciate the view. My chest felt tight, not the call an ambulance kind of tight, but a slow climbing pressure. I had done the math 1,000 times between the pharmacy and my driveway. Between the mortgage being paid off and our modest lifestyle, there should have been at least $12,000 in that account. Even if Cynthia had gone overboard on groceries, the math didn't hold water. I didn't know it yet, but that insufficient funds message was the first crack in a dam that was about to burst and wash my entire life away. I didn't say a word when I walked into the house. Cynthia was on the couch, scrolling through her iPad, looking as crisp and clean as a catalog model. She'd spent the day managing the household, which usually meant lunch with her mother and a trip to the craft store. Avery, my 26-year-old stepdaughter who had temporarily moved back in 2 years ago, was in the kitchen, complaining into her phone about a slow internet connection. They didn't even look up when I came in. I felt like a ghost in my own home, a soot-covered spirit that existed only to keep the lights on. I went straight to the bedroom, stripped off my work clothes, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. My father had died at 58 from black lung, leaving my mother with nothing but a mountain of debt and a funeral bill. I had promised myself I'd never be that man. I had saved. I had sacrificed. And yet, I was digging for quarters in a glove box. The next morning, I was at the Oakdale Credit Union before the doors even unlocked. I sat in my Silverado, watching the sun hit the brick facade of the building, feeling a cold knot of dread in my stomach. Angela Brooks, a woman who had handled my accounts since I was a rookie driller, saw me through the glass and let me in 5 minutes early. She knew my face. She knew the look of a man who was about to have his heart broken by a spreadsheet. When she pulled up the transaction history for the joint account, her typing slowed down. Her eyes darted across the monitor, and for a second, she looked like she wanted to reach across the desk and hold my hand. "Harlan," she said softly, "how much of this activity are you aware of?" She turned the monitor toward me. It wasn't a list of transactions. It was a crime scene. I saw the numbers first. $300 at a boutique in the city. $500 transferred via Venmo to someone named Derek Palmer. $400 at a high-end spa. I scrolled down, my finger trembling on the mouse. The names of the vendors changed, but the pattern was the same. Extraction. It was a systematic bleeding of everything I had earned Chinchumnamui feet underground. And then I saw the big one. A $2,800 charge for a wellness retreat in the Smokies. Cynthia had told me she was visiting her sister in Ohio that weekend. I asked Angela for the full history 10 months worth. The printer began to whir, a steady, mechanical rhythmic sound that felt like it was counting down the seconds of my marriage. Page after page slid into the tray, 5 pages, 10, 20. By the time it stopped, there were 47 pages sitting there. 47 pages of betrayal, documented in black and white. I took the stack, my hands smudging the edges with the leftover coal dust I could never quite wash away. "Do you want to open a separate account, Harlan?" Angela asked. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I felt a spark of something that wasn't weariness. It was a cold, hard clarity. "Not yet," I said. "I want to see exactly how deep this tunnel goes first." I spent the next 3 hours in the cab of my truck, parked at the far end of the lot. I read every single line. I saw the gambling apps, thousands of dollars lost to online casinos at 3 in the morning while I was sleeping off a double shift. I saw the maintenance fees for a storage unit I didn't know we had. But it was the name Derek Palmer that kept appearing like a recurring nightmare. Transfers of $500, $800, $1,000, sometimes twice a week. I realized, with a sickening jolt, that I wasn't just supporting my wife and stepdaughter. I was subsidizing a life I wasn't a part of. I was the engine room for a luxury cruise I wasn't invited to. The ironies were what hurt the most. On July 11th, the day I had worked a 16-hour shift in a flooded section of the mine to make sure we could afford the new water heater, Cynthia had spent $600 on professional organizing for her closet. On my birthday, while I was eating a lukewarm bologna sandwich in the dark of the crew room, $300 had been spent at a steakhouse in the city. I wasn't a husband to them. I was a coal seam. Something to be mined until there was nothing left but a hollow shell, and then abandoned when the roof finally caved in. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was a map of hard years, deep lines around the eyes, a jaw that stayed set even when I tried to relax, and the pale, dusty skin of a man who didn't see enough sun. I looked at the 47 pages sitting on the passenger seat. I could have gone home and screamed. I could have walked through the door and demanded answers. But you don't survive 38 years in a mine by acting on impulse. You survive by reading the signs. You listen for the creak of the timber. You watch the canary. And right now, the canary wasn't just dead. It had been poisoned. I started the truck and drove to a small law office on the outskirts of town. I didn't have an appointment, but I had a folder full of evidence and a look in my eye that told the receptionist I wasn't leaving until I spoke to someone. I spent an hour with a man named Miller who specialized in family complications. He looked at the statements and whistled low. "This isn't just overspending, Harlan," he said. "This is a coordinated drain. If you divorce her now, she'll argue for alimony based on this lifestyle you've established. You've been paying for it, so the court might decide you have to keep paying for it." I felt the air leave my lungs. "You're saying I'm stuck?" I asked. Miller leaned back, tapping a pen against his chin. "I'm saying you need to change the narrative before you pull the trigger. You need to make sure the lifestyle she's built is revealed for exactly what it is, a fraud." I left his office with a plan, but the weight of it was staggering. I had to go back into that house and pretend I didn't know. I had to sit at that dinner table and listen to them talk about what we needed to buy next. I had to look Cynthia in the eye and not let her see the 47 pages burned into my retinas. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Avery's car, a late-model Mazda. I was still making payments on parked crookedly on the grass. The house was glowing with warm light, looking like the picture of a happy American home. But I knew the foundation was rotted. I walked through the front door. The smell of expensive scented candles hit me immediately, another $20 charge I'd seen on page 12. Cynthia was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine. "You're late, Harlan," she said, her voice light, almost playful. "I was thinking about ordering Italian tonight. My back is killing me from all the gardening I did." She hadn't touched a shovel in years. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't even know who she was. She was a stranger who had been pickpocketing me for a decade. "Italian sounds fine," I said, my voice sounding like gravel. I walked past her, my boots heavy on the hardwood. I went to the hallway table and set my lunchbox down. I could feel them both watching me now, sensing a change in the air, like animals sensing a storm before the first drop of rain falls. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the thick stack of bank statements. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just laid them on the table, one by one, spreading them out until the mahogany surface was completely covered in a sea of white paper and black ink. "What is all this?" Avery asked, walking over with a smirk that died the second she saw the highlighted names. Cynthia stepped closer, her wine glass trembling in her hand. The silence in the room became absolute, the kind of silence you only find deep in the earth right before the mountain decides to move. I looked at my wife, then at the girl I had raised as my own, and I realized they weren't afraid of the money being gone. They were afraid because for the first time in 20 years, I was the one holding the map. "We need to talk about Derek Palmer," I said quietly. The glass in Cynthia's hand didn't just slip, It shattered against the floor, red wine spreading across the white rug like an opening wound. I didn't move to help her. I just stood there, waiting for the first lie to come out of her mouth, knowing it would be the last one I ever believed. The wine didn't just stain the carpet, it seemed to eat into it, a deep, fermented crimson spreading across the plush white fibers Cynthia had insisted we buy last spring. She stood there, frozen, the stem of the broken glass still clutched between her fingers, like a jagged weapon she didn't know how to use. For a long time, the only sound was the drip, drip, drip of the remaining liquid hitting the hardwood floor. Avery was the first to move, her face contorting from confusion into a mask of practiced outrage. She stepped toward the table, ignoring the glass, and pointed a manicured finger at the stack of papers. "Who do you think you're talking to, Harlan? You come in here, covered in filth, and start throwing around names like you've been spying on us? This is a family home, not one of your tunnels." Her voice had that high-pitched, vibrating quality she used whenever she felt backed into a corner. I'd heard it 100 times before, usually when I asked why the utility bill was double what it should be, or why her car needed new tires after only 6 months. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I'd been subsidizing this defiance for years. I didn't say a word. I just tapped the page on top, where the name Derek Palmer was highlighted in neon yellow. Cynthia finally found her voice, though it was thin and brittle, like dry parchment. "Harlan, honey, you're tired. You've been working too many doubles. Derek he's a friend of Avery's. He's been helping with some investments for our future." She tried to step toward me, her eyes darting to the papers, as if she could make the numbers disappear by sheer force of will. "We were going to tell you once the returns came in. It was supposed to be a surprise, a way for you to finally retire." I almost wanted to believe her. That was the trap I'd been living in for a decade. Looking back, I could see the hooks being set, one by one, so slowly I never felt the sting. I met Cynthia 10 years ago at a diner 3 towns over. I was a widower, 47 years old, with lungs that already felt heavy, and a house that felt far too quiet. She was beautiful, vibrant, and seemed to look at me like I was a hero for the work I did. She was a widow too, she'd said, left with a young daughter and a mountain of grief. I thought I was being the man my father raised me to be by stepping in to shield them. I thought providing was the highest form of love. In the beginning, it was small things. A new wardrobe for Avery because the kids at school were cruel. A kitchen remodel because this is where we'll build our memories. I felt a sense of pride every time I signed a check or handed over my mansion card. I felt like I was finally filling the holes in my life with something solid. I didn't realize I was just filling a bottomless pit. I remember the first time I felt that flicker of doubt, the first timber creak in the mine of my marriage. It was 3 years in. I'd come home early because of a localized cave-in, my heart still racing from the sound of shifting stone. I found Cynthia and her mother, Dorothy, sitting at this very table, surrounded by glossy brochures for luxury cruises. When they saw me, they didn't ask if I was okay. They just slid the brochures under a pile of mail and asked what was for dinner. I brushed it off then. I told myself they were just trying to stay positive. But as the years turned into a decade, the emergencies became more frequent. Avery's tuition for a degree she never finished. Cynthia's medical scares that required expensive specialists who somehow never sent a follow-up report. Every time I tried to look at the books, Cynthia would get those dark circles under her eyes and talk about how her nerves couldn't handle the stress of money talk. She made me feel like a brute for even asking. She made me feel like my only value was the sweat I left on the coalface. And Avery, she learned from the best. She treated the house like a high-end hotel, where the concierge was a man she barely spoke to unless she needed her oil changed or her insurance paid. I watched her grow from a sullen teenager into a woman who viewed my labor as a natural resource, like air or water, something that would always be there, no matter how much she took. I remember standing in the garage last summer, watching her load expensive luggage into that Mazda. "Going somewhere?" I'd asked. "Just a weekend with friends, Harlan." "Don't be so nosy," she'd replied. I looked at the bank statement later. $600 at a resort 2 hours away. I told myself it was just youth. I told myself she'd grow out of it. I didn't know then that the friends she was with included the man who was currently bleeding my retirement dry. Back in the present, the tension in the kitchen was thick enough to choke on. Cynthia was moving now, picking up the larger shards of glass with trembling hands. "We can fix this, Harlan." If you're upset about the money, we'll be more careful. Avery, tell him about the investment. Avery caught her mother's cue, her posture softening into something more manipulative. Dad, come on. Derek is a genius with crypto and tech stocks. We just didn't want to bother you with the details. You're always so stressed about the mine. We thought we'd handle the digital stuff while you handled the house. We're a team, right? I looked at the statement on page 24. $300 at a nightclub in the city, time-stamped at high. Muilam am on a Tuesday. I had been chin-chum-namui feet underground at high. Muilam am that Tuesday, bracing a sagging roof beam while the mountain groaned above me. The digital stuff looked a lot like bottle service and designer shoes. Is that why Derek Palmer has been at this house 4 days a week for the last 6 months? I asked. The question hit the room like a physical blow. Avery's mouth dropped open. Cynthia stopped mid-reach for a piece of glass, her face turning a ghastly shade of gray. What are you talking about? Cynthia stammered. Nobody has been here. You're imagining things. You're becoming paranoid, Harlan. It's that air down there. It's getting to your head. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine, not because of her words, but because of the ease with which she lied. She'd had that lie ready, polished, and waiting. She was willing to tell me I was losing my mind, rather than admit she'd turned my home into a clubhouse for her daughter's boyfriend. I didn't say I saw him, I replied, my voice dangerously calm. I said I know he was here. I had been the one to install the doorbell camera 3 years ago, after a string of package thefts in the neighborhood. Cynthia had complained about it then, calling it ugly and intrusive. I'd eventually stopped checking the app, trusting the peace of our street. But yesterday, after the card was declined, I'd sat in my truck and scrolled back through months of archived footage. I saw him. Every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Usually arriving 20 minutes after my truck pulled out of the driveway. Sometimes he'd stay for 3 hours. Sometimes he'd stay until the sun went down. I saw them laughing on the porch. I saw him wearing one of my old work jackets because he'd gotten a chill. I saw my life being worn by a stranger. Harlan, listen to me, Cynthia said, dropping the glass shards back onto the table. She reached out, trying to grab my hand, her fingers still wet with wine. Derek he was using the high-speed internet for his work. Avery's room has the best signal. It was just a convenience. We didn't tell you because we knew you'd react like this. You're so old-fashioned about the house. Old-fashioned, I repeated. The word tasted like ash. Is it old-fashioned to expect my wife not to lie to me for 10 months? Is it old-fashioned to expect my paycheck to stay in my account, instead of being Venmo'd to a man who doesn't even have the decency to bring his own jacket? Avery stepped in again, her face hardening. You're making a big deal out of nothing, so we spent some money. So what? You make plenty. You've got that pension coming up, and the house is paid for. What are you even saving it for anyway? To take it to the grave? You should be happy we're enjoying our lives. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the daughter I had tried to love. I saw a predator, a beautiful, well-dressed predator who viewed my entire existence as a buffet. And behind her, Cynthia was nodding, a small, desperate movement. They actually believed it. They believed that because I was the provider, I had forfeited my right to the fruits of my own life. I'm going to bed, I said. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't want to hear the next justification or the next sob story. I turned and walked toward the stairs, my boots feeling heavier with every step. Harlan, Cynthia called out, her voice rising in panic. Where are you going? We aren't finished. We need to settle this. The mortgage payment is due on the 1st, and we need... I stopped at the bottom of the stairs but didn't turn around. The mortgage is paid, Cynthia. I paid it off 8 years ago. You'd know that if you ever looked at anything other than the withdraw button. I went upstairs and shut the door to our bedroom. I could hear them downstairs, their voices muffled but frantic. I knew they were hovering over those 47 pages, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much I'd seen, and how much they could still get away with. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands. They were shaking, not with anger, but with the sudden, terrifying realization of my own freedom. For 10 years, I had been the beam holding up the roof of this family. I had taken the weight, the pressure, and the darkness so they could live in the light. But a beam only works if the foundation is solid. And as I listened to the frantic whispering below, I realized the foundation wasn't just cracked, it had been hollowed out from the inside. I reached into my nightstand and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. Inside were the phone numbers I'd collected over the years, contractors, old friends, and a cousin who worked in private security. I'd kept them, just in case, never truly believing I'd need a contingency plan for my own home. I looked at the digital clock on the bedside table. Jean, bon nuit p.m. I didn't know it yet, but the 47 pages were just the beginning. I had assumed the betrayal was financial. I had assumed it was about greed. But as I sat there in the quiet of my room, I realized there was a reason Derek Palmer was there every day. There was a reason the wellness retreats happened when I was at my most exhausted. I leaned back against the headboard and closed my eyes, but sleep was miles away. I was waiting. I was waiting for the house to go quiet, for the lights to go out, and for the mask to slip just a little bit further. Because I knew, deep in my gut, that there was one more page to this story, a 48th page that wasn't in the bank statements, and I was going to find it before the sun came up. The house breathed around me, a familiar rhythm of creaking floorboards and the low hum of the furnace, but it felt alien. For 10 years, I had walked these halls with a sense of ownership, thinking I had built a sanctuary. Now, every shadow in the corner felt like a witness to my stupidity. Downstairs, the whispering continued, a low, rhythmic buzzing that occasionally spiked with a sharp, frantic syllable from Avery. They were scrambling. They were trying to figure out which lie would stick to the wall and which one would crumble. I lay on top of the covers, my boots still on. I should have taken them off, but I felt like a soldier in a foxhole who knew the truce was a sham. I kept thinking back to the beginning, back to that rainy Tuesday at the diner when I first saw Cynthia. I had been a widower for 3 years, living in a house that felt too large for one man and a dog. My first wife, Sarah, had been a quiet woman, a school teacher who knew the value of $1 and the weight of a promise. When she died, she left a hole in the world that I tried to fill with overtime and silence. Then came Cynthia. She was like a burst of color in a world of gray coal dust. She had this way of looking at me like I was the strongest thing she'd ever seen. She told me about her ex-husband, a man who had allegedly gambled away their savings and left her with a toddler and a broken heart. She made me feel like a savior, and God help me, I wanted to be one. I wanted to be the man who could provide everything she'd lost. I didn't see the hook because I was too busy admiring the bait. I remember the first red flag, though I didn't call it that then. We had been married for 6 months. I'd given her a credit card for household emergencies. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the fraud department about a $400 charge at a boutique 2 towns over. When I asked her about it, she burst into tears. She told me she'd felt so plain lately, so unworthy of a man like me, and she just wanted to look nice for our dinner date. She made her vanity sound like a tribute to my hard work. I apologized to her. I actually apologized for making her feel like she had to ask. That was the blueprint. For 10 years, every time I questioned a charge or a missing sum, it was turned back on me. I was controlling. I was obsessed with money. I was bringing the darkness of the mine into the house. So, I stopped asking. I lowered my head, went into the earth, and let the bank account become a black box. I figured as long as the lights stayed on and the fridge stayed full, I was doing my job. But lying there in the dark, the math was finally catching up. $80,000. That wasn't just looking nice for dinner. That was a fortune in a town like Oakdale. That was a life savings evaporated into spa days, nightclubs, and a man named Derek Palmer. Around midnight, the whispering downstairs finally stopped. I heard the guest room door click shut Avery's room, and then the soft tread of Cynthia coming toward our bedroom. I closed my eyes, slowing my breathing, pretending to be the exhausted laborer she expected me to be. The door groaned open. I could feel her standing there, the scent of that expensive wine still clinging to her. She didn't come to the bed. She went to my dresser, her movements hushed and surgical. I watched through the slit of my eyelids. She was looking for something. She went through my work jacket, her fingers light as a pickpocket's, searching the pockets. Then she moved to the nightstand, checking the drawer where I kept the spare keys to the truck and the workshop. When she didn't find whatever she was looking for, she let out a long, shaky sigh and sat on the vanity stool, burying her face in her hands. In that moment, she didn't look like a villain. She just looked like a thief who had realized the vault was empty. But I didn't feel pity. I felt a cold, hard curiosity. What was she looking for? She eventually crawled into bed, staying on the very edge, her back turned to me. I waited until her breathing leveled out into the heavy, rhythmic cadence of sleep. Then, I moved. I've spent half my life moving in tight spaces with limited light. I know how to be quiet. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my boots in one hand, and crept out of the room. I didn't go to the kitchen. I went to the small office nook under the stairs, a place Cynthia called her space, where she handled the stressful task of paying the bills. The iPad was sitting on the desk, its screen dark. I knew the passcode. It was Avery's birthday, a date I'd been conditioned to treat like a national holiday. The screen bloomed to life, the brightness stinging my eyes. I didn't go to the bank apps. I knew what was there. I went to the messages. Most of it was fluff. Cynthia and her mother gossiping about neighbors, or Avery asking for gas money that was always exactly $100. But then I found the thread with Derek Palmer. It wasn't under his name. It was saved as the landscaper. We didn't have a landscaper. I mowed the lawn every Saturday morning until my back felt like it was made of broken glass. I opened the thread and scrolled. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. He's staying for a double tonight. One message from Cynthia read, dated 3 weeks ago. Avery says the coast is clear. Don't leave your bike in the driveway this time. The reply made my stomach turn. Whatever, Cyn. Just make sure the safety is in the account. I'm not coming over for just the view. It's there, she had replied. I moved it this morning. He doesn't even check the statements. He's too tired to even look at me. I felt a surge of bile in my throat. It wasn't just the money. It was the contempt. They had turned my exhaustion into a weapon. They had treated my hard work as a timer, a countdown that told them when they could start their real lives. I was the ghost in the machine, the provider who was only tolerated because he was too tired to be a participant. I scrolled further back, my eyes burning. And that's when I found the 48th page. It wasn't an email or a text. It was a photo of a document, a scanned PDF titled Draft Quitclaim Deed. I opened it, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped the iPad. It was a legal document for this house, my house, the one I had bought before I even met Cynthia, the one I had bled for. The document was designed to transfer the title from my sole ownership to a joint tenancy between Harlan Whitaker, Cynthia Whitaker, and Avery Hayes. But it wasn't the names that stopped my heart. It was the signature at the bottom, Harlan Whitaker. It looked like my handwriting, the way I looped the W, the slightly slanted W, but I had never signed this. I had never even seen it. Below the signature was a notary stamp from a local office in the next county over, dated 2 months ago. They weren't just spending my money, they were trying to take the roof from over my head. If that document had been filed at the county clerk's office, they wouldn't even have to wait for me to die. They would own 2/3 of everything I had. They could vote me out of my own life. I looked at the date on the notary stamp again, October 8th, the day I'd been in the hospital with that respiratory infection, the one that kept me on an oxygen tank for 48 hours. I remembered Cynthia being so attentive that day, bringing me papers to sign for the insurance company so she could handle the billing. I had been in a fog of fever and medication, trusting her hand to guide mine. She hadn't been handling the insurance. She had been stealing my home while I was struggling to breathe. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the iPad casting long, distorted shadows on the wall. I felt a strange sensation then. The anger was still there, but it was being overlaid by something else. A cold, calculating stillness. In the mine, when the air gets thin and the supports start to groan, you don't panic. Panic gets you killed. You look for the exit. You find the path that leads back to the surface. I realized then that the 47 pages of bank statements were just the gas in the mine. This deed. This was the fire. I heard a floorboard creak upstairs. Cynthia was moving. I quickly closed the iPad, set it exactly where I'd found it, and slipped back into the shadows of the hallway. I didn't go back to bed. I went to the kitchen and sat at the table, the one still stained with red wine. I waited. A few minutes later, Cynthia appeared at the top of the stairs, her silk robe billowing behind her. She looked down and saw me sitting there in the dark. She jumped, her hand flying to her throat. "Harlan, what are you doing? You scared me half to death." "I couldn't sleep," I said, my voice as flat as a stone. "I was thinking about the house." She walked down the stairs, her expression shifting into that practiced look of concern. "I know, honey. It's a lot to take in, but we'll fix it. We're a family. Maybe we should think about simplifying, selling this place, getting something smaller, something we all own together. to take the pressure off you." She said it so smoothly, like she was doing me a favor. "I was thinking the same thing," I said, watching her eyes. "But I think I found a better way to simplify." "Oh?" she asked, a spark of greed lighting up her face. "What's that?" "I'm going to the county clerk's office on Monday," I said, "to check on a signature." The color didn't just leave her face. It was like the life itself evaporated. She gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles turning white. She didn't ask which signature. She didn't play dumb. She knew the roof was coming down. "Harlan, wait," she whispered. "It's not what you think. I was just trying to protect us. If something happened to you in that mine—" "If something happened to me," I interrupted, "you would have had a paid-off house and a life insurance policy. But that wasn't enough, was it? You wanted it while I was still warm." I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor with a sound like a scream. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. "I'm going to the workshop. Don't come out there, and don't bother looking for your iPad." I already saw the landscaper's messages. I walked out the back door into the cold night air. I didn't know yet how I was going to get out of this tunnel, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to be the only one who got buried when the mountain fell. The workshop was cold, but it was a clean kind of cold. It didn't have the suffocating weight of the house, where the air was thick with 10 years of lies and the lingering scent of that spilled Merlot. I sat on my workbench, the wood pressed against my thighs, and stared at the door. I had a heavy-duty padlock in my hand, the metal cold and biting. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't thinking about coal seams or roof bolts. I was thinking about the fact that I had been sleeping next to a woman who had essentially been waiting for me to stop breathing. I've spent my life in a world where you don't lie to the mountain. If the timber grounds, you listen. If the dust gets too thick, you move. The mountain is honest in its danger. But Cynthia, she was a sinkhole disguised as a meadow. I looked around the workshop, my sanctuary. I saw my saws, my planes, and the half-finished rocking chair I'd been making for Cynthia's birthday. I picked up a chisel and, without really thinking about it, carved a deep, ugly, jagged line right across the seat. It felt better than screaming. I didn't know it yet, but the escalation was only just beginning. I thought I'd reached the bottom of the pit, but Cynthia and Avery were still digging. The sun didn't so much rise the next morning as it did leak through the gray Appalachian clouds. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the night looking through the workshop windows, watching the lights in the house flicker on and off. They were packing, or searching, or maybe they were just terrified. I walked back into the kitchen at Sao, Hong AM, my boots clunking with a deliberate rhythm. I wanted them to hear me coming. I wanted them to feel the weight of every step. Cynthia was at the table. She hadn't changed out of her robe. Her mother, Dorothy, was sitting across from her. Dorothy was 70, sharp-featured, and had a voice like a rusted gate. She had always treated me like I was a piece of equipment Cynthia had rented, useful for the heavy lifting, but not something you'd invite to the formal parlor. "Harlan," Dorothy started, her voice tight with practiced indignation. "Cynthia has told me about your outburst, your accusations. I must say, I'm appalled. After everything this girl has sacrificed to make a home for you, you're going to throw her out over a few clerical misunderstandings." Clerical misunderstandings. I sat down, not at the table, but on the counter, looking down at them. Is that what we're calling a forged quitclaim deed now? Or the $16,000 sent to a man named Derek? Maybe in your world, Dorothy, that's just shuffling the papers. In mine, it's a felony. Dorothy didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You've always been a small man, Harlan. Small-minded and obsessed with your little piles of dirt and dollars. You think because you work in a hole that you own the world above it. This house, it's been a home because of her. You were just the one who paid the bills. That doesn't give you the right to be a tyrant." It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was trying to shift the ground under my feet to make me feel like the villain for noticing I was being robbed. Tyrant. It was a word they'd used before. A word designed to make a man like me, who prides himself on being a protector, feel ashamed. But the 47 pages were still in my mind, and the memory of the landscaper in my old work jacket was a fire that Dorothy's spit couldn't put out. "The locks are being changed at noon," I said. My voice was quiet, which seemed to scare them more than if I'd been shouting. "I've already spoken to the bank. The joint account is frozen. Whatever's left in there is staying there until a judge tells me otherwise." Cynthia let out a sob, but it sounded hollow this time. "Harlan, please! We have bills. Avery's car payment is due. My credit card." "Avery's car is in my name. I interrupted. And since I'm such a tyrant, I've decided to stop the payments. The repo man should be looking for it by the end of the week. And as for your credit cards, I've reported them as stolen. Technically, since you've been using my identity to bypass the limits, they were stolen. The room went white-hot with tension. Avery came storming down the stairs then, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. You can't do that. I need my car. I have a life, Harlan. You're just a bitter old man who wants everyone to be as miserable as you are in that mine. She looked so much like her mother in that moment, the same entitled curve to her lip, the same way she viewed my sweat as her birthright. I didn't know it yet, but Avery had a secret of her own, one that would make the bank statements look like petty theft. You have a life, Avery? I asked. Then go live it. With Derek. I'm sure he's got plenty of room for you, seeing as he's been living here on my dime for half the year. Avery's face went from red to a ghostly mottled white. She looked at her mother, a silent plea for a new lie. But Cynthia was staring at the floor, the realization of her own exposure finally sinking in. I'm not finished, I said, standing up. I went to the shed this morning, the one where I keep the lawnmower. I found a bag, a gym bag. It's got Derek's name on it. And inside, it wasn't just clothes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, clear plastic baggie filled with white powder. I'd found it tucked into a side pocket of the gym bag, hidden behind a stack of stolen power tools from my own workbench. Is this part of the investment, Cynthia? Or is this why Derek needs $16,000 of my retirement money? The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Dorothy looked at the baggie, and then at her granddaughter. For the first time, the old woman looked small. She knew what this meant. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. This was a police matter. This was the kind of thing that could send Avery to prison and strip Cynthia of every shred of leverage she thought she had. Harlan, please, Cynthia whispered, her voice finally cracking for real. Don't. If you call the police, it will ruin her. She's just a girl. She got caught up with the wrong people. Derek, he's dangerous. He told us if we didn't give him the money, he'd what? Tell me I was being robbed? I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. You were already doing that. You chose him over the man who gave you everything for 10 years. You let him bring this into my house. You let him handle my tools. You let him sleep in my bed while I was chincham-namui feet deep, wondering if the air was going to hold out. I walked to the kitchen phone, the old-fashioned kind that hung on the wall. I picked up the receiver and started to dial. Wait, Avery screamed. I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you what they're planning for Monday. I paused, the receiver halfway to my ear. What happened next changed everything. I thought I was the one doing the confronting, but I was about to find out that the quitclaim deed wasn't the final move. It was just the diversion. Monday? I asked, my voice low. Avery was shaking now, real tremors that made her phone clatter against the table. The equity loan. Mom didn't just forge the deed, Harlan. She already submitted the application for a $60,000 home equity line of credit. It's supposed to be funded on Monday. She used your social security number, your tax returns, everything. We were going to take the money and go, all of us, to Florida. I felt a coldness wash over me that made the mind feel like a sauna. $60,000, on top of the $80,000 they'd already bled out. They were going to strip the house of its value and leave me with nothing but the debt and the dirt. And Derek? I asked. He's waiting for the wire transfer, Avery whispered. He said if we didn't get it to him by Monday, he'd go to the mine and make sure you had an accident. He knows the shifts. He knows where the ventilation shafts are. The room felt like it was spinning. This wasn't just greed. This was a death sentence. My wife hadn't just been cheating me. She'd been negotiating the price of my life. I looked at Cynthia, the woman I'd shared a bed with for 3,000 nights. She wouldn't look at me. She was just staring at the baggie of powder on the table, her world crumbling in slow motion. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I realized that if I called them now, the money would disappear, Derek would vanish, and I'd be left fighting a legal battle that would last years while my credit was incinerated. I needed a different kind of justice. I needed to let them think the plan was still in motion. Dorothy, I said, turning to the old woman, you're going to help me. Why would I help you? She hissed, though her bravado was gone. Because if you don't, I said, leaning in close, I'm going to tell the police that the drugs were yours. And given your age and your nerves, I don't think you'll survive a week in the county lockup. But if you help me set a trap for Mr. Palmer. Then maybe, just maybe, I'll let Cynthia and Avery walk away without handcuffs. I saw the wheels turning in Dorothy's head. She was a survivor, first and foremost. She looked at her daughter, then at her granddaughter, and finally at me. She saw a man who had been pushed past the point of mercy. "What do you want us to do?" she asked. I looked at the clock. It was Bamui a.m. I had 3 days until Monday. 3 days to turn my house into a cage and my life into a weapon. "First," I said, "Cynthia is going to call Derek. She's going to tell him the bank needs one more signature, an in-person verification. And she's going to invite him here, tonight." Cynthia looked up, her eyes wide with terror. "He'll know, Harlan. He's not stupid. He'll see you're here." "Oh, I won't be here," I said, a slow, dark smile spreading across my face. "I'll be at work, or at least that's what the truck in the driveway and the lights in the workshop will tell him." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their own making. I had work to do. I had spent 38 years learning how to navigate the dark, how to brace for a collapse, and how to dig my way out of the impossible. Derek Palmer was about to find out that a coal miner doesn't just know how to find the light, he knows exactly how to make the darkness work for him. As I walked toward the workshop to prep the verification Derek was expecting, I realized my heart wasn't racing anymore. It was steady, a slow, rhythmic thud. I was back in the mine, and I knew exactly where the weak spots were. But as I reached the workshop door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My truck, the one I'd left in the driveway, had a single, long scratch down the side, and tucked under the windshield wiper was a small, grimy note written in a hand I didn't recognize. "Monday is too far away, Harlan. Let's talk today." I stood there in the gray morning light, the note fluttering between my fingers like a dead leaf. The scratch on my Silverado wasn't just a bit of vandalism. It was a deliberate scar across the only thing I had left that felt truly mine. I didn't know it yet, but the man who wrote that note had already decided that my life was worth less than the equity in my floorboards. I looked back at the house. The windows were like dark eyes, watching me. Inside were 3 generations of women who had spent a decade refining the art of the steel, and now they had invited a wolf into the yard to finish the job. I felt a surge of cold, crystalline anger, the kind that makes your vision go sharp and your heartbeat slow down to a steady, rhythmic thud. It was the same feeling I got when I heard the secondary shifting of the mountain after a blast. It's the sound of a choice being made for you. I walked back into the kitchen, the note crumpled in my fist. I didn't say a word. I just walked over to the table and smoothed the paper out right in front of Cynthia. She looked at it, and for a second I saw a flash of genuine, unadulterated terror in her eyes. She wasn't just afraid of me anymore. She was afraid of the monster she'd brought home. "He was here," I said. My voice was a low rasp, like stone grinding on stone. "While we were talking about your clerical errors, he was outside, marking my truck. He's not waiting for Monday, Cynthia, and he's not waiting for a signature." "Harlan, I didn't know he'd come here now," she stammered, her hands flying to her mouth. "You didn't know?" I stepped closer, leaning over the table until I could see the fine lines of panic etched into her face. "You gave him my schedule. You gave him the layout of my house. You gave him $16,000 of my blood and sweat, and you think I believe you didn't know he'd get impatient? A man like Derek doesn't wait for the wire transfer when he can just reach into the drawer." Avery sat slumped in her chair, her defiance replaced by a shivering, hollow-eyed silence. She was looking at the baggie of white powder I'd left on the table. What happened next changed the way I looked at my stepdaughter forever. "It wasn't Mom's idea to speed it up," Avery whispered, her voice so low I almost missed it. "It was mine." I turned to her, the air in the room suddenly feeling very thin. "What did you say?" Avery looked up, and for the first time, I didn't see a spoiled girl. I saw someone who had gone completely dark inside. Derek was going to leave. He was bored with me. He was going to take the money he already had and head to Vegas, I told him. I told him about the life insurance. I told him that if he helped us get the equity loan, I'd make sure he got half of the payout when you were gone. The silence that followed wasn't just heavy. It was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. I looked at Cynthia. She was staring at her daughter with a look of profound horror, as if she was seeing a stranger. But I knew better. Avery hadn't become this on her own. She was a mirror. She had watched her mother treat me like a bank for 10 years, and she had simply taken the logic to its natural conclusion. If I was worth more dead than alive, why wait for the slow drain of a joint account? How much? I asked. My voice didn't even sound like mine. It was a ghost's voice. 300,000, Avery said, a single tear tracking through the makeup on her cheek. Double indemnity for an accident in the mine. He said he could make it look like a faulty brace. He's worked construction. He knows how the physics work. I felt a strange, detached sense of irony. I had spent 38 years worrying about the mountain falling on me, never realizing the real danger was sitting in my kitchen, eating the breakfast I paid for. Get up, I said. Harlan, please. Cynthia started, reaching for my arm. Get up, I roared, the sound echoing off the walls. Both of you, and Dorothy too, you're going to the workshop, now. I marched them out the back door. The morning air was crisp, the scent of pine and damp earth normally a comfort, but now it just felt like the smell of a fresh grave. I herded them into the workshop and pulled out 3 folding chairs. Sit, I commanded. I went to my workbench and pulled out a heavy-duty chain I usually used for dragging logs. I didn't bind them, not yet, but I let the metal clatter against the floor. The sound was a reminder of what I was capable of. These women had spent years thinking I was a simple beast of burden. They forgot that you have to be tough to survive the dark. You're going to call him Avery, I said, sliding her phone across the workbench. You're going to tell Derek that I'm home. You're going to tell him that I found the drug bag and that I'm calling the police in an hour. Tell him, if he wants his investment and the documents for the loan, he has to get here before I pick up that phone. He'll kill you, Harlan, Cynthia cried, her voice rising to a shriek. He has a gun. I've seen it. He keeps it in the waistband of his jeans. Please, just let us go. We'll leave. We'll never come back. You should have thought about that before you put a price on my head, I said. I looked at the clock on the wall. Bay. Mourim am. Call him, Avery, now. Or I call the sheriff and tell them about the drugs, the forgery, and the conspiracy to commit murder. I wonder how Dorothy will handle the state prison infirmary. Avery's hands were shaking so hard she dropped the phone twice, but she dialed. I stood over her, my hand resting on a heavy iron pipe, watching the screen. Derek? Her voice was a thin, wavering wire. He knows. Harlan found the bag in the shed. He's losing his mind, Derek. He's going to call the cops. He's in the workshop right now, trying to burn the papers. You have to get here. He's alone. She listened for a second, her face turning a shade of white I'd never seen on a living person. She hung up and looked at me. He's coming. He said he'll be here in 10 minutes. He told me to stay in the house. Good, I said. Now give me your phones, all of you. I took the phones, tossed them into a bucket of mineral spirits, and locked the workshop door from the outside. I could hear them sobbing, the sound muffled by the heavy timber walls I'd built with my own hands. For 10 years, I had built a home to protect them. Now, I had built a cell to keep them safe from the fire they'd started. I walked back to the house, but I didn't go inside. I went to the garage and grabbed my compound bow. I'm not a violent man, but I've been hunting these woods since I was 12. A bow is silent. A bow doesn't announce your position to the neighbors, and at 30 yards, I could put an arrow through a silver dollar. I didn't wait in the house. That was my first mistake, assuming he'd come through the front door. I moved to the shadows of the woodpile near the edge of the driveway, my heart a slow, deliberate drum. I didn't know it yet, but Derek wasn't coming alone. The rumble of the motorcycle didn't come from the road. It came from the old logging trail that cut behind my property. He was smart. He knew the house had eyes. I crouched low, the smell of damp cedar filling my nostrils. The sound of the engine cut out about 50 yards back. Then, silence. The woods in Oakdale are thick, filled with laurel and scrub oak. You learn to listen for the wrong sounds, the snap of a dry twig, the sudden silence of the birds. I heard him before I saw him, but there were 2 sets of footsteps, one heavy, one light and quick. I adjusted my grip on the bow. A carbon fiber arrow knocked and ready. My breathing was shallow, my mind focused. This was exactly like waiting for a seam to settle. You don't move until the pressure is right. Derek stepped into the clearing first. He looked exactly like he did on the camera, arrogant, dirty, and dangerous. He had a chrome-plated pistol in his right hand, held loosely at his side, but it was the man behind him that made my blood run cold. It was Miller, the lawyer I'd visited only 2 days ago, the man who had told me I had a strong case, the man who had seen all my evidence, heard my plan, and knew exactly where I was vulnerable. He wasn't wearing a suit now. He was in a tactical jacket, looking like a man who enjoyed the dark a little too much. "He's in the workshop, Derek," Miller said, his voice smooth and devoid of the professional warmth he'd used in the office. "The women are in there too. Just do what we talked about. We get the signed papers, we get the drug bag, and then we call it in, as a domestic tragedy. Disgruntled husband loses it, kills the family, then himself. Clean, professional." "I don't like professional, Miller," Derek spat. "I like fast. I'm going to go in there, blast the old man, and then we're leaving. I don't care about the tragedy part." I sat in the shadows, a cold realization washing over me. I had walked right into a second trap. Cynthia hadn't just been stealing, she'd been part of a larger machine. Miller wasn't just a lawyer, he was the architect. He probably found men like me tired, wealthy in equity, and lonely and used women like Cynthia to harvest us. I looked at the two of them. They were 20 yards away. I could take one, but the other would have a gun on me before I could knock a second arrow. I needed a distraction. I needed to use the one thing they didn't think I had, the house. I reached into my pocket and hit the remote for the garage door. The mechanical groan of the motor shattered the silence. The lights in the garage flickered on, casting a long, bright rectangle of light across the driveway. Both men spun, their weapons raised. "He's in the garage," Derek yelled, lunging forward. "Wait, you idiot," Miller hissed, but it was too late. Derek ran toward the light, his silhouette a perfect target against the white-painted walls of the garage. I rose from the woodpile, my muscles screaming with the tension of the bow. I didn't aim for his head. I aimed for his leg. I wanted him alive. I wanted him to talk. The arrow hissed through the air, a silent predator. It caught Derek right in the thigh, the broadhead burying itself deep into the muscle. He let out a shriek that sounded more like a wounded animal than a man, his pistol clattering to the pavement as he went down. Miller didn't hesitate. He didn't check on his partner. He dove for cover behind my truck, his eyes scanning the tree line. He was a pro. He knew the shot hadn't come from the garage. "Harlan," Miller shouted, his voice echoing off the house. "I know you're out there. You're just a coal miner, Harlan. You don't know how this works. You think a bow and arrow is going to save you? I have your tax returns, your bank records, and a signed statement from your wife saying you've been abusive for years. Even if you kill us, you're done. You'll die in a cage." I didn't answer. I moved, staying low, circling around toward the back of the truck. My heart was pounding now, the adrenaline finally hitting my system. I didn't know it yet, but Miller had one more card to play, and it was the one I should have seen coming. "Cynthia," Miller yelled. "He's out here. Tell him what we did with the life insurance policy. Tell him who the beneficiary is now." I froze. The beneficiary. I had assumed it was Cynthia. From the workshop, I heard a muffled, screaming sound. Not of terror, but of something else. I realized then that I hadn't locked the workshop door as well as I thought, or maybe there was a spare key I didn't know about. The workshop door swung open. Cynthia didn't come out crying. She came out with a heavy framing hammer in her hand, her face a mask of cold, hard desperation. She didn't look at Derek, who was moaning on the ground. She didn't look at Miller. She looked at me. "It's over, Harlan," she said, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. "The policy isn't for Avery. It isn't for me. We signed it over to Miller's investment firm a month ago to cover our debts. If you die, he gets the money, and we get a clean slate. He's going to take us to Florida, Harlan. He's going to give us a real life." I looked at my wife, the woman I had tried to save, and I saw the truth. She didn't want a savior. She wanted a payday, and she was willing to walk over my corpse to get it. "Miller isn't taking you anywhere, Cynthia," I said, stepping out of the shadows, my bow lowered. "He's a scavenger. Look at him. He's already using your husband's truck as a shield. You think he's going to share $300,000 with a middle-aged widow and a drug-addicted girl?" Cynthia hesitated, the hammer trembling in her hand. She looked at Miller, then back at me. In that split second, the mountain finally moved. Miller stepped out from behind the truck, his gun pointed directly at Cynthia's head. "He's right about one thing, Cyn," Miller said, a cruel smile touching his lips. $300,000 is a lot of money, but it's even more when you don't have to split it. I didn't know it yet, but the next 5 seconds would be the longest of my life. The barrel of Miller's pistol was a small, dark circle that seemed to swallow all the light in the driveway. Cynthia stood frozen, the framing hammer dangling from her hand like a toy. In that moment, The hierarchy of the house had been reset. She wasn't the mastermind. She wasn't even a partner. To a man like Miller, she was just a line item, a liability that needed to be balanced out. I saw the realization hit her, a slow motion, shattering of the illusion she'd been living in. She had thought she was escaping a life of coal dust for a life of Florida sunshine, never realizing she'd just traded a protector for a predator. Miller smiled. That expensive, $400 an hour smile that I'd seen in his office. He looked at me over the sights of the gun, his posture relaxed. He thought he knew me. He thought he was dealing with Harlan Whitaker, the simple miner who didn't understand digital stuff or legal physics. He saw a man who worked with his back and his hands, which meant, in his mind, I didn't work with my head. It's a common mistake people make about the men who go underground. They think the dark makes us blind. They don't realize the dark makes us see things other people miss. You're a smart man in a dumb job, Harlan, Miller said, his voice as smooth as silk. But you're out of your depth. Drop the bow. Drop it now, or I'll let Cynthia see what a hollow point does before I put one in you. It doesn't matter to me how many bodies the sheriff finds. A tragedy is a tragedy. Sometimes the unstable husband takes out everyone. It's a sad story. It'll lead the local news for a week. I didn't drop the bow. I didn't move. I looked at Derek, who was still on the ground, clutching his thigh. The arrow had done its job, but he was reaching for his pistol again, his fingers clawing at the asphalt. I had one shot. One arrow knocked. If I aimed for Miller, Derek might get a shot off. If I aimed for Derek, Miller would kill Cynthia. The physics of the situation were leaning toward a total collapse. I didn't know it yet, but the mountain was about to groan, and I was the only one who knew which way the rocks would fall. You talk a lot for a man whose plan is falling apart, Miller, I said. I kept my voice low, the way you speak when you're trying to keep a gas pocket from igniting. You think you've covered your tracks? You think those signed statements from Cynthia will hold up once the forensic accountants look at the equity loan? I didn't just go to your office to get advice, Miller. I went there to see if you were the one helping them. You were too eager. You knew too much about the house's value before I even gave you the address. Miller's smile didn't falter, but his eyes shifted a micro-movement, the kind a canary makes when the air starts to turn. Evidence? You have a folder of bank statements, Harlan. That's it. My name isn't on a single one of those transfers. I'm just the guy helping a poor, abused woman escape a monster. That's the record. That's the only record that exists. Is it? I asked. I shifted my weight, letting the tip of the arrow dip just an inch. I'm a miner, Miller. We don't like surprises. That's why we use sensors. We monitor the air. We monitor the vibration. My truck, the one you're using for a shield, it's a Hangin Lea Haimui Bone Silverado. It's got the upgraded security package. Batchum Salmui degree cameras. Audio recording. It's been streaming everything to my cloud account since you stepped out of that logging trail. Miller's face finally changed. The polished, professional mask cracked, revealing the panicked scavenger underneath. He looked at the side mirror of the truck, then at the small black domes of the cameras embedded in the grille. He realized then that his professional conversation with Derek about killing a family had just been recorded in high definition, with GPS, timestamps, and crystal-clear audio. What happened next was the moment I stopped being the resource and started being the mountain. Cynthia saw her chance. Whether it was a sudden burst of bravery or just the survival instinct of a cornered animal, she swung. Not with the hammer, but with the wine bottle she'd been clutching in her other hand, a heavy, thick-bottomed bottle of expensive champagne she'd probably bought with my money. It caught Miller on the side of the head, a dull thud followed by the sound of breaking glass. Miller stumbled, his shot going wild, the bullet shattering the windshield of my truck. I didn't wait. I didn't even think. I drew the bow back to full tension, the carbon fiber limbs screaming, and released. The arrow caught Miller in the shoulder, spinning him around and pinning him against the door of the Silverado. He dropped the gun, his hand flying to the wound, his face a mask of disbelief. I was across the driveway before the gun even hit the ground. I kicked the pistol away and grabbed Miller by the collar of his tactical jacket, slamming him back against the truck. I'm 62 years old, but I've spent those years lifting hydraulic jacks and timber beams. I have the kind of strength that doesn't show in a gym. It's the kind of strength that comes from 3 decades of fighting gravity. The police aren't coming because of a chinchamuimot call, Miller, I hissed into his ear. They're coming because I called Marcus, my shift lead, an hour ago. He's the brother of the county sheriff. He's been watching the live feed from the truck since you arrived. They're coming from the logging road. You're trapped." As if on cue, the woods erupted with the sound of sirens and the blinding flash of blue and red lights. 2 cruisers tore out of the tree line, tires screaming as they boxed in the driveway. Men in uniform jumped out, weapons drawn. "Hands up, nobody move." I stepped back, my hands raised, watching as the law finally took control of my yard. They tackled Miller to the ground, the architect now just another man in handcuffs, bleeding on the asphalt. They got to Derek next, who was too weak from blood loss to do anything but moan. I looked over at Cynthia. She was sitting on the porch steps, her head in her hands, her silk robe torn and stained with glass and dirt. Avery had come out of the workshop, standing by the door, her face a hollow shell of shock. Dorothy followed, her eyes darting around like a bird looking for a new cage. They were all there, the women who had tried to bury me. Harlan. Marcus walked up, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. He looked at the scene, then at the bow, still in my hand. "You okay, Stu?" "I'm tired, Marcus," I said. "I'm just really tired." "We got him. The recording from the truck is clean. Conspiracy, attempted murder, drug possession, fraud. Miller's going away for a long time." "And the women." Marcus looked at Cynthia and Avery. "The sheriff wants to know how you want to play it, Harlan. They were part of the conspiracy. We have the messages on the iPad. We have Avery's confession to you." I looked at my wife. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic hope. She thought the tyrant would soften. She thought the provider would step in one last time to shield her from the consequences of her own choices. She started to cry, a high, thin wail that used to make me feel like a monster. Now, it just sounded like wind in an empty tunnel. "What about the life insurance?" I asked Marcus. "Miller's firm is already being flagged. The transfer won't go through. The house is still yours, Harlan. The deed she forged is void. You've got a long road with the banks, but you're clear." I walked over to Cynthia. I didn't yell. I didn't even sound angry. I just looked at her, seeing her for the first time without the filter of my own loneliness. "You told Miller I was a small man, Cynthia. You said I was obsessed with my little piles of dirt. You were right about the dirt. It's what I know. And the one thing you learn when you move enough dirt is that you eventually find the rock, and you can't move the rock." "Harlan, please," she whispered. "We can start over. We can go to therapy." I was scared. "You're going to the station," I said. "And after that, you're going to find a lawyer who isn't trying to kill your husband, because you're going to need one." I turned my back on her. I walked into my house, and I went to the kitchen. I picked up the baggie of white powder from the table and handed it to a deputy. I looked at the 47 pages of bank statements, still spread out across the table. They looked like autumn leaves, dead and discarded. I went to the sink, turned on the tap, and started to wash the coal dust off my hands. I scrubbed until the water ran clear. I scrubbed until my skin was red and raw. I could hear the cruisers pulling away, the sirens fading into the distance. The house was quiet. No whispering, no hidden landscapers, no secret wellness retreats. I didn't know it yet, but the final twist wasn't in the betrayal or the arrest. It was in the mailbox. I sat at the table, alone, and waited for the sun to fully rise. My heart was steady. The tightness in my chest was gone. I felt like I'd just finished the longest shift of my life, and for the first time in 10 years, I was actually home. Around noon, after the investigators had finished and the yellow tape had been cleared, I walked to the end of the driveway to check the mail. Among the bills and the flyers was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was from a law firm in the city, but not Miller's. It was from the executors of my first wife Sarah's estate. Sarah had died 10 years ago, leaving me with this house and a small life insurance policy. But there had been a piece of land, a scrubby, overgrown lot 3 counties over that we'd bought as a joke, thinking we'd build a cabin one day. I'd forgotten all about it in the fog of the last decade. I opened the envelope. "Dear Mr. Whitaker, as per the recent geological survey conducted by the state, the property in Greene County has been identified as sitting atop a significant rare earth mineral deposit. Several tech firms are interested in a long-term lease. The initial offer for the mineral rights is $750,000. I sat down on the gravel of my driveway and started to laugh. I laughed until tears ran down my face. Cynthia and Avery had spent 10 years bleeding me for $80,000. They had tried to kill me for $300,000, and all the while, I had been sitting on a fortune they never knew existed because they were too busy looking at my bank account to look at my life. I looked up at the Appalachian Hills, green and ancient. I was 62 years old. I had my house. I had my peace. And now, I had a future that had nothing to do with the dark. I stood up, tucked the letter into my pocket, and walked back toward the house. But as I reached the porch, I saw a car I didn't recognize pulling into the driveway. A sleek, black sedan. A woman stepped out, someone I hadn't seen in 20 years. "Harlan," she asked, "is it true? Is it over?" What happened next would change the meaning of family forever. The woman standing by the black sedan didn't move. She just stood there, her hand resting on the roof of the car, watching me with eyes that were so familiar they felt like a physical weight in my chest. She was tall, with the same stubborn set to her jaw that I saw every morning in the mirror, and hair the color of autumn wheat exactly like Sarah's. It had been 12 years. 12 years of silence, 12 years of missed birthdays, and 12 years of being told that my only biological child, Elizabeth, wanted nothing to do with the dirty life of a coal miner. "Beth," I whispered, the name feeling like a jagged piece of glass in my throat. I hadn't said it out loud in a decade. Cynthia had made sure of that. Every time I brought her up, Cynthia would get that pained, saintly look on her face and remind me of the vicious letter Beth had allegedly sent after our wedding, the one where she called me a traitor to her mother's memory. I'd never seen the letter. Cynthia said she burned it to spare my feelings, but I had believed her. I had lived in the shadow of that lie for a third of my life. Beth didn't run to me. She didn't scream. She just walked forward, her boots clicking on the same gravel where Miller and Derek had been bleeding out only hours before. She stopped 5 feet away, her eyes scanning the yellow police tape still fluttering on the porch, the shattered windshield of my truck, and finally, my face. "I saw the news alerts on the scanner," she said, her voice steady but thick with an emotion she was fighting to keep under wraps. "I've been working as a paralegal in the city, Dad. I've been tracking Miller's firm for 18 months. I knew he was a bottom feeder, but I didn't know he had his teeth in you. I felt the world tilt. I didn't know it yet, but the tamui, whom Cynthia had stolen, was the cheapest part of the lie." "Tracking him?" I asked, my mind struggling to bridge the gap between the daughter I thought hated me and the woman standing in my driveway. Cynthia said. "She said you moved to the West Coast. She said you changed your name." Beth let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded exactly like Sarah. "I moved to the next county, Dad. I sent you letters every month for the first 3 years. I called this house 100 times. Cynthia always answered. She told me you were recovering from Mom's death by erasing us. She told me you'd sold all of Mom's things and that you didn't want a reminder of your mistake marriage. She told me if I ever showed up here, you'd call the police for trespassing." I sat down on the porch steps, the weight of the realization crushing the breath out of me. It wasn't just a financial drain. It was a total psychological demolition. Cynthia hadn't just wanted my paycheck. She wanted my soul. She had isolated me, cut off the only person who truly loved me, and built a wall of lies so high I couldn't see the sun. She had turned me into a lonely, exhausted ATM so I wouldn't have the energy to look for the truth. "The mineral rights," I said, pulling the cream-colored envelope from my pocket with trembling fingers. "The letter I just got. Did you have something to do with this?" Beth stepped closer, finally sitting on the step beside me. She didn't touch me yet, but I could feel the warmth of her presence, a light in the darkness I'd lived in for too long. "I work for the firm, representing the tech consortium, Dad. When the geological survey flagged the Greene County lot, I made sure the offer went directly to you, certified mail, and not through any third-party estate managers. I knew if Cynthia got her hands on it, you'd never see a dime. I was trying to reach you, but I had to be careful. If Miller knew I was your daughter, he would have accelerated the plan." "He already did," I said, looking at the broken glass on the driveway. "He tried to have me killed today." We sat there in the silence of the afternoon, the summer sun finally warming the wood of the porch. Beth told me about the last 12 years, the law degree she'd put herself through, the way she'd kept tabs on me through old friends at the mine, and the dozens of letters that I now realized Cynthia must have intercepted and burned. Every holiday I'd spent feeling like an unwanted guest in my own home. Beth had been sitting 40 miles away, thinking I'd traded her for a newer, shinier family. The reversal didn't happen in a courtroom or through a bank transfer. It happened right there, in the quiet space between a father and a daughter who had been robbed of a decade. But I wasn't the broken man Cynthia thought I was. I was a miner, and when you find the source of the rot, you don't just patch it, you clear the whole shaft. Monday morning came with a different kind of pressure. I wasn't going to the mine. I was going to the county jail for the depositions. Beth was with me, acting as my primary liaison. I wore my best suit, the one Cynthia had bought me for a fundraiser 3 years ago, to make me look like a success. Walking into that sterile, fluorescent-lit room, I felt like I was chinchumnumwe feet deep. But this time, I had the only lantern that mattered. Cynthia was brought in first. She looked like a ghost. Without her expensive creams, her designer clothes, and her carefully curated housewife persona, she was just a tired, middle-aged woman with hollow eyes. When she saw me, a flicker of that old, manipulative hope sparked in her gaze. But then she saw the woman sitting next to me. The color didn't just drain from Cynthia's face. It was like she had been struck. She looked at Beth, then at me, and her mouth worked soundlessly. The wall of lies hadn't just cracked, it had disintegrated. "Harlan," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can explain. I did it for us. I did it so we could have a real future." "You did it for a future that involved my death, Cynthia," I said. I didn't feel rage. I felt a profound, echoing emptiness where my love for her used to be. I saw the messages. I saw the deed. And I've spoken to my daughter, the real one. The deposition lasted 6 hours. With Beth's help and the recordings from the Silverado, the prosecutors didn't just have a case. They had a mountain of evidence that was ready to slide. Miller, realizing the ship was sinking, had already started turning on Cynthia, trading his testimony for a reduced sentence on the attempted murder charge. He was pinning the entire conspiracy, the drugs, the forged deed, the hit on my life on her and Avery. I watched through the glass as Avery was brought in next. She wasn't crying anymore. She was shouting, blaming her mother, blaming Derek, blaming everyone but herself. She was a product of the rot, a fruit grown from a poisoned tree. I looked at her and felt a strange sort of grief. I had tried to be a father to her, but you can't build a house on quicksand. What happened next was the final reversal of the Whitaker estate. By the end of the week, the legal landscape had shifted completely. Because of the attempted murder and the systematic fraud, the Slayer statute and common law fraud principles were being invoked. Cynthia wasn't just losing the house, she was being stripped of any claim to alimony, any share of our joint assets, and she was facing 10 to 20 years in state prison. Avery, because of the drug bag and her role in the equity loan, was looking at a minimum of 5. But I wasn't done. I had $750,000 coming my way from the mineral rights, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to hide it. I went to the credit union and met with Angela Brooks one last time. "I want to set up a trust," I told her. "The Greene County mineral rights, the house, and my entire pension. It's all going into an irrevocable trust for Elizabeth Whitaker." Angela smiled, a real one this time. "And what about you, Harlan? What are you going to live on?" I looked at my hands. They were still stained, but the weight was gone. "I've got enough for a cabin by the reservoir and a new set of woodworking tools. I don't need much. I just want to make sure that the people who tried to mine me never get a single grain of what's left." The house on Maple Ridge Road went up for sale 2 weeks later. I couldn't live there anymore. Too many ghosts in the walls, too many echoes of whispers that weren't meant for me. I spent my final night there with Beth. We sat on the porch, not with wine, but with 2 cold beers, watching the fireflies dance over the lawn. "I found something in the attic while I was packing, Dad," Beth said, handing me a small, scorched metal box. It was tucked behind the insulation, near the chimney. I think Cynthia tried to burn it, but the box was too thick. I opened the box. Inside weren't bank statements or legal documents. They were the things Cynthia hadn't been able to spend. Sarah's wedding ring, which I thought I'd lost years ago. My father's old pocket watch. And a stack of photographs from when Beth was a baby. Pictures I thought had been destroyed in a basement flood Cynthia had told me about during our 2nd year of marriage. I held Sarah's ring in my palm, the gold cool and solid. In that moment, the 10 years of Cynthia felt like a dream, a long, dark fever that had finally broken. I hadn't lost my life. I had just been diverted. I didn't know it yet, but the final twist wasn't about the money or the prison time. It was about a secret Sarah had left for me in that Green County lot. As the movers took the last of the furniture, the couch I'd bought in Chinwitam, the kitchen table with the wine stain, I felt a sense of lightness that was almost terrifying. I was 62, I was wealthy, and I was starting over with a daughter I barely knew but already loved more than anything. But as I went to lock the front door for the final time, the doorbell camera, the one that had started it all, sent a notification to my phone. Motion detected at the front door. I looked at the screen. It wasn't a process server or a buyer. It was Dorothy, Cynthia's mother. She was standing there, looking older than the hills, her eyes wild and her clothes disheveled. She didn't know the house was empty. She didn't know I was standing right on the other side of the wood. "Harlan!" she screamed, pounding on the door. "You can't do this. You have to help them. We're family. You have to use that money to get them out. You owe us." I stood there, my hand on the deadbolt, listening to the woman who had helped orchestrate my destruction. I thought about the 10 years of meals I'd paid for, the bills I'd covered, and the way she'd looked at me like I was dirt under her fingernails. I didn't open the door. I didn't shout back. I simply reached up and unscrewed the camera from its mount, cutting the feed. The screen on my phone went black. "Goodbye, Dorothy," I said to the empty hallway. I walked out the back door, got into my truck, and drove away. I didn't look back at the house. I looked at the rearview mirror, where Beth was, following in her sedan. We were headed to the reservoir. We were headed to the light. But as I reached the main road, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a message from the law firm handling the Green County lease. "Mr. Whitaker, we found something else during the deep core drilling. It's not just minerals. You need to come down to the site immediately. This changes the value of the property by millions." The drive to Green County took nearly 2 hours, a winding journey through the heart of the Appalachians that felt like traveling through my own history. Beth sat in the passenger seat, her laptop open, navigating the legal complexities of a windfall I still couldn't wrap my head around. For 38 years, I had gone into the earth to find value for other men corporations that viewed me as a line item on a budget. Now, the earth was reaching back up to me. I pulled the Silverado onto the shoulder of a gravel road that overlooked the lot. It was 15 acres of scrub pine, jagged limestone, and overgrown briars. To the casual eye, it was worthless, the kind of land people used for illegal dumping or let go for back taxes. But as we stepped out of the truck, I saw the drilling rigs. Massive, yellow iron monsters stood like sentinels on the ridge, their diamonds tipped with the sweat of a different kind of labor. A man in a white hard hat, his face tanned and weathered, walked toward us. He didn't look like the lawyers in the city. He looked like a man who knew the taste of rock dust. "Mr. Whitaker?" he asked, extending a hand that felt like sandpaper. "I'm Jim Vance, the lead geologist. I've been in this business 40 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what we pulled out of the core samples yesterday." I looked at the ground, the red clay clinging to my boots. The letter said it wasn't just rare earths. Jim signaled for us to follow him to a portable trailer. Inside, spread across a drafting table, were high-resolution geological maps and a series of glass-encased core samples. We found the lithium, sure. That's what brought the tech firms in. It's a massive deposit, high purity. But about 60 feet below that, we hit a geological anomaly. It's a vein of high-grade, industrial-quality quartz, encased in a rare gemstone matrix. It's the kind of formation that only happens once in a million years. He tapped a section of the map highlighted in a deep, vibrant blue. We estimate the value of the mineral rights alone is now north of $12 million. And that's a conservative pre-auction figure. If we go to a bidding war between the semiconductor manufacturers, you're looking at double that. I felt a strange, dizzying sensation. $12 million. My mind flashed back to the 47 pages of bank statements to the Mui Sao Bonchum Cynthia had sent to Derek. To the Bon Mui Bay prescription that had been declined. They had been trying to kill me for a few $100,000 in equity, never realizing that the dirt I'd owned for 20 years was a treasure map. The ultimate irony was a cold, hard weight in my chest. If they had just been honest, if they had just been a family, we would have been billionaires in spirit and millionaires in fact. Instead, they chose the shortcut through the dark. "There's something else," Beth said, her voice soft. She was holding an old, yellowed ledger she'd pulled from Sarah's metal box. "Dad, look at the date on the back of the deed." I took the paper from her. On the back, in Sarah's neat, teacher's handwriting, were coordinates and a short note dated just months before she died. Harlan, the old-timers always said the ridge had a secret. I bought this not for the wood, but for the weight. When the world gets too loud, look deep. This is for you and Beth. For the days when the mind feels too heavy. She knew. Sarah had seen it, or sensed it, or heard the stories from the old miners who lived in these hills before the big corporations moved in. She hadn't bought it as a joke. She had bought me a way out before she even knew I'd need one. I stood there, a 62-year-old man with coal dust in his lungs, and I wept for the woman who had truly loved me. I had spent 10 years thinking I was protecting her memory by staying with Cynthia, when the truth was that Sarah had been protecting me from the grave. I didn't know it yet, but the final confrontation with Cynthia wouldn't be about the money. It would be about the look in her eyes when she realized she'd lost everything. The sentencing hearing was held on a gray Tuesday in mid-July. The courtroom was small, smelling of old paper and floor wax. Miller was there, looking diminished in a bright orange jumpsuit, his legal brilliance useless against the digital evidence from my truck. Derek Palmer sat in a wheelchair, his legs still heavily bandaged, his arrogance replaced by a hollow, flickering fear. But it was Cynthia and Avery who drew the eye. They sat at the defense table, their shoulders hunched. They hadn't seen the news about the mineral rights yet. The court had kept my financial status sealed during the criminal proceedings to prevent any further manipulation. The judge, a woman who looked like she'd seen every variety of human greed, didn't waste time. "Mr. Miller, you have betrayed the bar and the very concept of justice. 25 years. Mr. Palmer, 15 years. And as for you, Mrs. Whitaker." The judge paused, looking over her spectacles at Cynthia. "The systematic financial abuse of your husband was one thing. The forgery of a deed was another. But the conspiracy to orchestrate a mine accident for a life insurance payout, that is a level of depravity this court rarely sees. You treated a human being like a commodity to be harvested." Cynthia stood up, her eyes wet, her voice a practiced, trembling whisper. "Your Honor, I was desperate. I was scared. Harlan was so controlling, he made me feel like I had no choice. I only wanted a life for my daughter." The judge slammed her gavel down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. "The evidence says otherwise, Mrs. Whitaker. The recordings from the vehicle show a woman who was not scared, but calculating. You will serve 20 years in the state penitentiary. Your daughter, Avery, for her role in the forgery and the drug possession, will serve 8. As the bailiffs moved in to lead them away, Cynthia turned to me. She looked at me one last time, her mouth opening to offer one more plea, one more lie. But I didn't give her the chance. I stood up, walked to the railing, and handed a single piece of paper to her lawyer. "What's this?" Cynthia hissed, her eyes darting to the document. "It's a copy of the mineral rights lease," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "The one Sarah bought for me. It was just finalized this morning. $12 million, Cynthia. That was the value of the dirt you thought I was obsessed with. If you had just been a wife, you would have never had to worry about a bill again. But you wanted the insurance money instead." The look that crossed her face wasn't just regret. It was a total, internal collapse. She looked at the number on the paper, then at me, and then at the handcuffs being snapped around her wrists. The realization that she had traded a life of unimaginable wealth for 20 years in a cell was the only revenge I ever needed. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just went limp, her legs giving out as the bailiffs dragged her toward the side door. Avery looked at me, her face a mask of shock, but I didn't have anything left to say to her. I had tried to be her father. She had tried to be my executioner. The account was settled. What happened next was the first day of the rest of my life. I didn't move to Florida. I didn't buy a mansion or a fleet of cars. I bought a cabin on the edge of the Millbrook Reservoir, a place where the only sound at night was the water lapping against the shore and the call of the owls. I retired from the mine, though I still wake up at Bamui every morning out of habit. I spent the rest of the summer in the new workshop I'd built behind the cabin. It was larger than the old one, filled with high-end tools and the finest walnut and oak I could find. But the first thing I made wasn't for sale. I finished the rocking chair, the one I'd carved the jagged line into during that first night of rage. I'd sanded the scar away, replaced the wood, and polished it until it glowed like honey. Beth visited every weekend. We'd sit on the porch, the rocking chair finally in use, and talk about the things we'd missed. We talked about her mother. We talked about the future. She used her share of the trust to start a nonprofit that provided legal aid to elderly victims of financial abuse. She was her mother's daughter, after all, always looking for a way to teach the world something good. One Saturday evening, as the sun was setting over the reservoir, casting long, golden shadows across the water, Marcus stopped by. He brought a six-pack of beer and a bag of bologna sandwiches, and we sat on the dock, our lines in the water. "You look younger, Stu," Marcus said, taking a sip of his beer. "I didn't think it was possible for a guy who spent 40 years in a hole, but you look like you're finally breathing." "I am, Marcus," I said. I looked at my hands. The coal dust was finally gone. The black lines in my cuticles had faded, replaced by the clean scent of cedar and pine. I spent my whole life worrying about the mountain falling on me. I never realized that as long as you're standing on solid ground, the mountain can't do a thing. I reeled in my line, the silk thread shimmering in the twilight. I didn't catch anything that night, but it didn't matter. I wasn't fishing for food anymore. I was just enjoying the water. The moral of my story isn't about the money. The money was just the earth's way of saying thank you for the years I spent in the dark. The real story is about the 47 pages. It's about the moment you realize that your worth isn't tied to what you provide, but to who you are. Cynthia and Avery thought they were mining a man. They thought I was a resource to be extracted until the seam ran dry. But they forgot that the most valuable things in this world aren't found in a bank account or a life insurance policy. They're found in the truth. They're found in the quiet of a morning without lies. And they're found in the arms of the family that stays when the lights go out. I'm Harlan Whitaker. I'm a retired miner, a woodworker, and a father. My house is small, my life is quiet, and my heart is full. And for the first time in 62 years, I know exactly what I'm worth. And let me tell you, it's a hell of a lot more than $12 million.